I'm gonna be honest, I think I'm just starting to get tired. My last video review was a short, angry rant, which was a style break for me. If I'm being truly transparent, I think half the reason for that change was because I just didn't feel like explaining why that episode sucked in a 15-minute long elaborate deconstruction. I mean, you know it sucked, I know it sucked, the video was different, but I was still able to explain why it sucked. So, why not? It was a win-win. I kind of feel the same way about this episode, where I don't want to do an elaborate deconstruction of it because, in my opinion, it's fairly obvious why it wasn't all that good, but I don't have the same anger towards it. I just can't muster the vitriol for another rage rant over this. It's just so mediocre that I just kind of slogged through it and moved on. Kinda disappointed and annoyed, but not enough to make an impassioned video unleashing my disdain. I was so underwhelmed by this episode that I didn't even really develop a definitive opinion on it until a few days later, hence this video's somewhat delayed release. So what am I gonna do? A regular video, but I'm gonna keep it short, as I have very little to say about this episode. Plot of this episode is unevenly divided. There's two stories here, one where Blitz is trying to track down his fresh out of rehab sister, Barbie, and another where Eminem screw around, literally, at a summer camp on an investigation. Apparently a first for them. I say unevenly because the episode devotes almost all of its time to the Eminem story in a half-hearted attempt to give Millie some kind of arc, while leaving the much more interesting Blitz storyline to die on the vine, at least until the last 5 minutes or so, when they try and squeeze some emotion out of a conflict that they spent virtually no time of this episode building up to. In addition to all that, they have Eminem cross-dress again. I have no idea why. Was it because it did so well last time? Is it because they wanted to pander to trans people? Well, yes, but that's for later. Was it because they wanted an excuse to have Richard Horvitz talk in this funny voice for a good chunk of the episode? Knowing the writing team, it could have been any of those reasons. The episode decides to open by duping the audience into thinking that it'll be following something interesting, by showing us Blitz breaking into rehab looking for his sister. He goes back to the office and we see that IMP actually have a client. This guy wants him to find out who drilled holes in his boat, drowning him. This leads to Moxie heading up the IMP's first investigation to find the killer, while Blitz goes off on his sister storyline. I like to remind you all, this is the first time we've seen the IMP do their actual main job of taking money from sinners to kill humans since f***ing Cherubs 2 years ago. This whole storyline kind of sounds like it would get a little bit, repetitive and boring after a while, doesn't it? You're right, and that's why I dropped the entire concept after episode 3. Oh, you did? So what did they do instead? They spent a lot of time interacting with other characters in numerous different settings. This line aged incredibly well, and I made that video halfway through season 1. I must be psychic. So here's that pandering I was talking about.
Don't worry, sir. We'll find your killer and give him what's coming to him. And or her. Or they.
When you're talking about an unknown party, you use they by default since you don't know who you're speaking of. That's just standard English, so whatever this was completely unnecessary. In my opinion, the only reason that this exists is so the show can say, hey, we acknowledge LGBTQ people, look. Viv, there's no need to do this. More than half of your pro tags aren't straight. We get it and already know that you appreciate that community, so just don't do whatever this is. It sounds stupid. Anyways, Eminem go to the camp, and the show wastes no time making Moxie a fool. The killer is immediately discovered, undercutting him once again. He also looks like a dumbass for not being logical and ignoring the guy who obviously did it just because he really wants to investigate. So because Millie feels bad for him, she lets him do his little investigation, which begins with getting close to the camp children. Of course, he immediately fails at this and they all hate him. I will give this episode some praise here, though. I think that these girls being audience surrogates and asking why Moxie has very obvious demon features is funny. Because, yeah, who wouldn't ask about those in real life? I also think it's kind of funny how they say Moxie's red skin is f***ed up, but then they say that Millie has a beautiful tan. Some nice age-appropriate hypocrisy there. Continuing, Viv decides to once again remind her viewers that she's a proud member of our Child Free, and then we cut back to Blitz for a minute. He goes to some unknown location and begins attacking some guy for information about his sister, and he says she's out on a pickup. Who's the guy? What's the location? I don't know. None of it has been shown to the audience, because nobody wanted to see more of that. We all wanted to see more of Moxie getting bashed, because we haven't seen enough of that already. Back to the camp, Millie is apparently gaining a lot of traction with the people there, and
every day, as I walk around camp, all of these girls.
Millie starts singing in a voice that definitely isn't Vivian Nixon's, and yeah, it's not good. I'm on the fence when it comes to average Helluva Boss songs. I usually don't care much about this aspect of the show, so because I'm neutral, when a bad one crops up, it really stands out for me. After about a minute of this, Eminem starts talking again, and here's Millie's supposed arc. I guess it's that she likes attention, which is something that she seldom receives and doesn't like being pushed into the background or something like that. Moxie is starting to get a little pissy over this success, but she cools it by telling Moxie to try to investigate, using his skills, like his music. Also, side note, what's with these new SpongeBob-ass facial expressions? That was a weird choice. Anyways, I'm sure you can guess how Moxie's attempt to use his skills goes. You know, it's dawning on me that the Helluva Boss writing staff isn't constantly betraying Moxie's character. They're just rewriting him into the show's pointless comic relief. They really don't want Moxie being the smart one, the marksman one, or the musical one. And this episode is literally just a huge showcase of anything you can do, I can do better. And anything Moxie tries to do that Millie isn't doing better than him, he just fails miserably at. Calling this an emasculation is redundant because he's dressed like a f***ing woman the entire time. They really couldn't have been more obvious about what it was they were trying to do. Moving forward, time for the middle. Well, it's more like the second half, actually. After yet another failed attempt from Moxie, he goes to cry in a tool shed, and Millie literally has to build him back up to coax him out, like he's a goddamn child throwing a temper tantrum. I can't describe to you how much I hate this character direction. He's once again told to play to his strengths, something that he does very little of for the rest of the episode. And when he does, he just keeps getting trashed for no reason. In a f***ing montage, no less. So Millie gets a concert, I guess, and goes to tell Moxie about it. God, is Millie really that unaware? Can she not see how hard of a time her husband is having with this? You really think that he'd appreciate to hear about this after a week straight of never catching a break? Anyways, this causes Eminem to get into their first fight of the series. Interesting to see for sure, but the surrounding circumstances make it a little hard to enjoy. The fight builds on Moxie's frustration and Millie's arc of actually enjoying praise and feeling good about herself instead of being constantly feared and relegated to the background. So not necessarily a bad foundation, but it just doesn't work because it feels manufactured. And they make Moxie a bit unrealistically dickish in this fight, and really for the whole episode. Moxie doesn't seem like the type to get all angry over an investigation that was made pointless by the show in the first 2 seconds. They really do have to bring him down a few levels to facilitate this conflict. That's another problem. In order to facilitate Millie's arc, they just tear down Moxie. That's not how you develop characters. Anyways, we cut back to Blitz, and it's time for our A and B stories to connect. He holds up some guy and uses this MacGuffin crystal thing to open a portal to Earth, and he just so happens to pop out in the same camp that Eminem are at. My, that's convenient. Also, I guess it's really not that hard to get to Earth from Hell. That's not really worth getting angry about, though, because we stopped pretending like the Grimoire was important in, mid-season 1? Wait, Octavia needed to steal it to go to LA and Seeing Stars? Never mind, that's just a plot hole then. Thanks, episode. So, Millie's about to go do her concert without Moxie, and then he rises out from the stage, compliments her a few times, and boom, conflict over. He finally decides to listen to Millie and pursues the very obvious villain guy from before, who's now with some other person. However, he runs into Blitz before getting to the boathouse they ran into. Sure enough, the obvious murder kid is in there with Blitz's sister, Barbie, in a human disguise. The four of them spend some time comedically arguing while Millie does a light-skinned stare. I gotta say, I actually like Barb's character quite a bit. She almost seems like another Blitz in both personality and humor, but maybe toned down a little bit. And seeing as I already like Blitz most of the time, that's a good thing. Also, apparently human drugs like heroin don't negatively affect imps, really, with it being said to have the same effects as like an aspirin to them. However, regular-ass drugs still seem to affect sinners the same, if this scene from the Has-Been pilot is anything to go off of. So that's some interesting world building. Anyways, the four people in the boathouse keep arguing, and then it erupts into a classic Helluva Boss third act fight with accompanying original song. This time the song is what Millie is playing at her concert. Personally, I think this should have just been an instrumental, because the instrumentals are good, but the lyrics come across as trying way too hard to be so ridiculous and cringy it's funny, which I think is a trap that Vivzy Pop's creations often fall into. The fight ends with the murder kid getting erupted by a firework, and then the writers try and pull some emotion out of Barb and Blitz's relationship. You know, the one that got maybe like 30 seconds of screen time prior to this in the entire episode. This scene carries almost no weight due to the fact that we've seen almost no interaction between these two characters. We know nothing about their relationship. All we know is that Blitz wants to patch things up and Barb doesn't like him. Two things I think we could kind of already get from context clues. The only thing they say that I could call new information here is that Blitz definitely legitimately cares about his family, which is something that isn't 100% clear based on the one interaction we've seen him have with family-related stuff, which were the photos after Ozzy's. He could have been crying for any reason. We don't know why. It doesn't necessarily show that he cares about their well-being. This scene proves he does. Or at least the well-being of his sister. Anyways, aside from that, all this scene does is kicks the revelation and resolution of Blitz's family drama further down the road. If they're going to postpone it more, they should at least give us more than one thing to think about outside of things we could already surmise. So what happens after that? Eminem fuck on stage in front of everyone, which everyone thinks is incest due to their covers, and nobody questions the fact that they're clearly otherworldly demons. And Moxie gets made fun of some more because remember, he's solely useless comic relief now. The end. I said everything I wanted to say about this episode in the prologue and body of this review. I still think it's a boring, slightly below average episode of Helluva Boss. It's not senseless assaulting brain rot like Season 1 Episode 8, but it's not good enough to be a solid or really even average episode of the show. 6 out of 10, below the pilot, which is also a 6 out of 10. Maybe it's a 5.5 then. I don't know, and don't really care. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to like, comment, and share it around. Bye!